High school is a pivotal time in the development of one's life. Not only will you develop the skills to be successful looking forward, but you will also make memories that you take with you throughout the duration of your life. However, for many, high school is a time of trial and change. Workloads and social stresses can make it a difficult environment that can trigger severe anxiety for those who suffer from a mental illness. With 3/4 of mental illnesses beginning before a student even begins college, it's hard to ignore the reality of mental illness in high school students. Of those youth in need, up to 80% don't receive services to assist them. In fact, the average delay for someone to receive full assistance after the onset of their symptoms is 9 years. However, waiting to act can have harsh consequences. Over half of all students who fail high school have a diagnosed mental illness. This, coupled with the fact that 70% of youth in the juvenile justice systems have mental health issues, is concerning to many. Therefore, one should consider the available modifications in our education system which are created to accommodate those with mental illness. Cheyenne High School provides an atmosphere for its hundreds of students to learn and grow with the rapidly progressing world of college and work life. However, on average, 1 out of every 10 will experience some form of mental distress within the span of these 4 years. School counselor Mitchell Grunig outlines this issue from the school's perspective.
It is something that affects our students here. I think we oftentimes we're trying to tell ourselves that it's not something that our students really struggle with. Cheyenne's in a wonderful neighborhood with some awesome opportunities, and we wanted to say, it wasn't our kids. And when something like that happens, it makes it quite obvious that everyone struggles with it. It doesn't matter where you're from, it's going to be in your school.
From the faculty, I definitely do feel like a lot of them do care about that stuff pretty heavily, while others not so much. I mean, it's sort of like a give and take situation, or it could be where some teachers are just not effective at dealing with that, or aren't very social, or have issues with dealing with that. However, I've noticed that a lot of them are very supportive of that and know when workload is too much sometimes, know when you need to stop, or know when you're feeling a little stressed, or when some students are feeling a bit too much stressed.
In response to the heavy workload and high demand of students, kids experience loss of sleep and are led into unhealthy mental cycles. These cycles initiate by triggering symptoms such as confusion, frustration, respiratory and cardiovascular stress, as well as nervousness, which can lead to feelings of sadness or depression.
The workload is a little bit much for certain classes, like AP English. Sometimes we'll have a lot of work, and in other classes at the same time we'll have a lot of work. So I feel that sometimes schedules conflict, and certain events and projects sort of come into being at the same time. So it's a little bit of a workload normally towards January and February. So it gets a bit much sort of around there.
There was a point this last winter where I felt very behind, and I had 2 weeks worth of stuff to do, and I couldn't find time to do it, and I ended up having to homeschool myself in order to get back on track.
Fortunately, there are also several options for students who suffer from a mental illness to seek help. School counselors and psychologists grant students the opportunity to speak out and express their troubles with a trained professional. These resources also provide students a solution-based system to deal with the stress of school and their personal lives. These resources are also easily accessible for students. With the constantly demanding lives of teens, counselors are willing to adjust to the needs of students.
Normally we do things like setting up weekly meetings with students that are struggling with their counselor. We also meet with their teachers, parents, and we try to get kind of a whole team approach into helping students be successful here that are struggling in one area or another. We can do small groups or small rooms for testing, maybe do extended time if they're gone for an extended period or something like that. So those are kind of some basic accommodations we do at Cheyenne.
Students are referred here through a number of different ways. Sometimes it's the school counselors, sometimes it's the parents, sometimes it's teachers, sometimes it's somebody in the community. People are referred to me through all sorts of different means. I think that school counselors try to manage things as best they can within the school. So I think they're maybe a little bit more reluctant to bring in somebody from the outside.
Talking about mental illness can be very challenging. To open oneself up by discussing the hardships of personal struggle is a frightening concept for many. The fear of judgment for being, in a sense, abnormal is one of the most common teen fears. Although it may seem like a rare subject, many students have withstood similar situations of depression and anxiety and are likely to have positive input or advice to offer.
Sometimes a lot of people like me sort of feel like they're walking on eggshells with certain groups and people because, you never really know when to say it, you never really know what to say about it, because it's kind of an awkward situation when you're talking to sort of another peer.
The fear to speak up limits the progress which we can work together to achieve. The well-being of students is considered a priority by all the staff at Cheyenne.
Obviously you have to have staff that care. Being able to foster a good relationship between staff and students is probably the best way to start. Just a caring environment for kids to do well. One that also is going to challenge them. It might not be easy, but it's just a good place for them to come learn, feel safe and comfortable.
I definitely get really burned out, so oftentimes I'll just pass out on my bed just randomly, and I won't be able to wake up until the next morning, and I am not able to get the work done. And sometimes I just get so nervous, sometimes I have panic attacks and certain situations like that where it's sort of almost out of my control. I've had near panic attacks with the STEM projects, if you remember those, during freshman and sophomore year. Not necessarily complete panic attacks, but you'll notice I was very frantic, very sort of erratic at times, as well as during really large projects. Sometimes I've had to completely stop because I'm breathing too heavy, or I actually legitimately have a panic attack, and I just need to calm down for a couple of hours or so.
There are times when it's challenging to keep up with the quick-paced expectations at school. In times where students are enduring the discouraging hardships of mental illness, schoolwork is especially challenging to complete.
I have utilized school resources. I take my tests in the principal's office when I have anxiety during them, and I ask for extended periods of time when needed.
In certain situations, students can also be granted other accommodations based on their workload.
So 504s allow for students that have a disability. Basically allows us to provide them accommodations through that form. What we often do is just do an evaluation just to see what they qualify for and what's a good avenue to help support them. And most of the time we do it kind of through MTSS and kind of go from there.
504 documents are most effective simply in that they're able to lay out what's going to help somebody get to where they need to be. 504 plans typically look at, are there special accommodations that need to happen, or what's going to make someone a success, as opposed to just kind of the standard, here's this box you have to fit into, and if you don't, you fail. So I think 504s help individualize plans and make people more successful.
So we send them out to all teachers and staff that deal with the student with that specific 504 document. And the nice thing is we can adjust it as we see fit. It's kind of a fluid document. So we take them very, very seriously. At the same time, we try to keep kids from just jumping on a 504 right away, just because there's a lot of other avenues to get that similar support, like I said, through MTSS and stuff like that.
When it came to like stress and stuff like that, I normally sort of try to deal with that on my own and not really utilize a counselor as much for that. But there was one particular situation where I did.
I believe some of the school resources have enough ability to help, but some don't quite work as well. For example, like teachers giving extended deadlines tends to work pretty well, but you can't always take a test in the principal's or counselor's office, and you can't always use the resources.
Whenever I did encounter like a lot of stress, it was sort of helpful in that it got me sort of pointed in the right directions, and or at least most of the time anyways. There was a couple of points where they can't really help me in certain locations, but other than that, they normally point me in the right direction to sort of where I want to go.
I think the counselors here don't quite understand what it's like to have a panic attack and be in the moment. So in order to help the immediate effects, I think they could provide a safe place for the ability to talk, and you don't have to schedule an appointment specifically, because when you're having a panic attack and you need to talk to somebody and they tell you to schedule something for hours later, it doesn't exactly help you.
There's only so much effectivity to therapy itself, because again, for therapy and change, you kind of have to want change, and you kind of have to want to be able to talk about these things.
When faced with the grueling hardships of mental illness, it is important that students take into mind the effective principles of speaking out and sharing their burden.
I think a lot of people don't quite research and know enough about mental illness, so there tends to be this stigma around it. My peers could easily just, research and find out what it's like, or watch a documentary about it, because it really does affect a lot of people, and it's good to know what your friends or acquaintances are going through.
Getting the right services can sort of help you through that sort of branched path. And even if it isn't through some therapeutic service or something like that, maybe it's just talking through your peers and seeing what they've done if they've had, similar situations or similar, mental illnesses. It's sort of helpful to be able to talk with those people one-on-one and see where you can navigate from there. And that's helped me quite a bit, whether it be through online peers, whether it be through, physical peers like me and you. And it's just helpful to sort of talk with people individually and get their experience and tell them your experience and let them sort of help you.
Mental illness impacts the happiness, relationships, and success of millions of teenagers. For those who suffer in silence, we have one extremely important message for you. You are not alone. If you are an individual who is affected by a mental illness, it is imperative that you utilize the many resources provided by your school or your community and speak out. In the case of those at Cheyenne High School, it's time to end the stigma and move forward into a school environment of peace and happiness for all.